"You're just family help, dear. Know your place." Those words from my father-in-law Richard still echo in my mind as I stood in the glaring spotlight, accepting an award that would change everything. The look on his face when he realized the kitchen help he'd belittled for years was now being celebrated on national television is something I'll never forget. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began, when I was just Jennifer Taylor, the disappointing daughter-in-law who could never measure up. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My story starts 3 summers ago at Cedar Lake, Michigan, where the prestigious Bennett family gathers annually for their reunion at what they call the Compound, a sprawling lakefront property with a main house and 3 guest cabins. I remember the first time my husband Daniel brought me there. "They'll love you," he promised, squeezing my hand as we drove down the private road lined with ancient oaks. The main house came into view, a magnificent 3-story structure of timber and stone that seemed to rise organically from the landscape. I felt my throat tighten. Until that moment, I hadn't fully understood the wealth gap between us. Daniel came from old money and academic prestige. The Bennett name adorned university buildings and graced the board of trustees at multiple institutions. Meanwhile, I was Jennifer Taylor, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse to put me through community college. I'd dropped out in my second year to pursue digital art, a decision that had paid our bills but hardly impressed Daniel's father, Richard Bennett, Professor Emeritus of Economics and self-appointed patriarch of the Bennett clan. "Remember, Dad can be a bit traditional," Daniel warned as we parked beside luxury SUVs and a vintage Jaguar. "Just be yourself, but maybe don't mention your new project right away." By new project, he meant my digital art installation exploring economic inequality in America. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been working on the piece, Glass Ceilings, for months, my most ambitious work yet. It combined photography, animation, and interactive elements that responded to viewers' movements. I'd submitted it to the National Digital Arts Competition on a whim, never expecting anything to come of it. "Daniel, you made it!" A tall, silver-haired man strode toward us, arms outstretched to embrace my husband. Richard Bennett had the confident posture of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. When he turned to me, his smile remained intact, but his eyes performed a quick assessment, lingering on my simple sundress and the tattoo of a paintbrush on my wrist. "And this must be Jennifer." He extended a hand. His grip was firm, businesslike. "Daniel tells me you're creative." The way he said creative made it sound like a communicable disease. "Digital artist," I clarified, smiling despite the immediate knot in my stomach. "It's wonderful to finally meet you, Dr. Bennett." "Richard, please, we're family now." His tone suggested this was a concession rather than a welcome. "Come inside. Everyone's eager to meet Daniel's bride." The introduction to the extended Bennett family was a blur of names, titles, and achievements. Cousin Margaret, the neurosurgeon, Uncle Philip, the federal judge, Daniel's sister, Caroline, the architectural engineer. Each greeting came with a recitation of credentials that made my digital artist sound increasingly insubstantial. "And what university did you attend, dear?" asked Daniel's Aunt Eloise over pre-dinner drinks on the terrace. "I studied at Lakeside Community College, but I left to pursue my art full-time," I explained. "How brave," she replied, her eyebrows arching as she sipped her gin and tonic. "In this economy," Daniel jumped in. "Jennifer's work is really innovative. She combines technology and art to—" "Speaking of innovation," Richard interrupted, "Caroline's firm just won the bid for the new science center at Princeton. $30 million project. We're all so proud." And just like that, the conversation shifted away from my unimpressive career. I caught Daniel's apologetic glance, but just smiled and excused myself to use the restroom. Inside, I splashed, water on my face, and gave myself a stern look in the mirror. "It's just a weekend," I whispered to my reflection. "You can do this." Little did I know that weekend was just the beginning. That evening, I noticed Richard's wife Evelyn working, alone in the kitchen while everyone socialized outside. I offered to help, and she seemed genuinely grateful. "You're sweet to offer." "Nobody ever does," she said, showing me where to find serving platters for the catered meal. As we worked together, I learned Evelyn had once been a promising pianist who gave up her career when she married Richard. "Different times," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Richard needed a wife who could support his career, host faculty dinners, raise Daniel and Caroline." "Do you still play?" I asked. "Sometimes, when no one's home." Her hands moved efficiently as she arranged appetizers. "Richard thinks it's frivolous at my age." I felt a chill despite the warm kitchen. Was this a glimpse into my future with Daniel? When we carried the food out to the terrace, Richard beamed at his wife. "There she is, the backbone of this family." He turned to me. "Evelyn knows what makes a house a home. You should get her recipes while you're here." Daniel tells me you're not much of a cook. Daniel winced. "Dad, I just said we eat out a lot because we're both busy." "A family needs home-cooked meals," Richard insisted. "When you have children, you'll understand the importance of traditions." The conversation moved on, but I felt the first subtle shift in my position within the family. By stepping into the kitchen with Evelyn, I'd inadvertently accepted a role. The next morning, I came downstairs to find Richard, Daniel, and several male relatives preparing for a fishing trip. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Richard called. "The ladies are having brunch on the terrace. Evelyn could use your help setting up." It wasn't a request. Daniel kissed me quickly. "We'll be back for dinner. Have fun with the girls." I watched them leave, then found Evelyn in the kitchen with Caroline and 2 female cousins. They were arranging pastries on platters and slicing fruit. Without being asked, I picked up a knife and began helping with the melon. "Jennifer, would you mind making the coffee?" Caroline asked. "I always mess it up somehow." It was the first of many small tasks that gradually became expectations. By the 3rd day of that first reunion, I had somehow been designated as kitchen help, following Evelyn's instructions and serving food I'd had no part in planning. Each time I tried to join conversations about politics, literature, or current events, someone would remember they needed something from the kitchen. "Jennifer, be a dear and check if there's more ice." "Jennifer, these glasses need refreshing." "Jennifer, Aunt Martha takes her tea with lemon, not milk." Daniel seemed oblivious to what was happening. When I pointed it out after that first reunion, he looked confused. "They're just including you in the family dynamic," he said. "Dad mentioned how impressed he was with how naturally you fit in." "As the help?" I asked. "Don't be dramatic. Everyone pitches in." But they didn't. During subsequent family gatherings, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, the pattern solidified. The men discussed important matters while the women prepared meals, and somehow, I always ended up with the most menial tasks. Washing dishes, while Caroline supervised. Vacuuming while Aunt Eloise pointed out spots I'd missed. Running errands when supplies ran low. By the time the next summer reunion arrived, my role was firmly established. I was the family workhorse. Not quite. Family, not quite staff. Richard would pat my shoulder approvingly when I cleared his plate or refilled his whiskey. Daniel found himself a real homemaker, he'd tell guests, as if this were my primary qualification for marriage. It was during that second summer reunion that something in me began to rebel. I had just spent 3 hours preparing a lavish brunch while everyone else went sailing. As I carried a heavy tray of mimosas down to the dock to serve the returning sailors, I heard Richard's voice. "Daniel, you lucked out. No career ambitions to compete with yours. Happy in the kitchen and easy on the eyes, too." "Dad, Daniel protested weakly. "Jenny has her art." "Hobbies are important for housewives," Richard agreed magnanimously. "Keeps them busy while the men work." I nearly dropped the tray. My art wasn't a hobby. It was my passion, my voice, my contribution to the world. I had 2 gallery shows scheduled that fall and a growing online following. But in Richard's eyes, anything that didn't come with prestigious credentials and a 6-figure salary was merely a pastime. That night, I tried again to make Daniel understand how his father's attitude affected me. "I feel invisible except when someone needs something," I explained as we got ready for bed in the guest cabin. "Your father dismisses everything I care about." Daniel sighed. "That's just Dad's generation. He means well. Besides, you are good in the kitchen, and he sees that as a compliment." "But it's not who I am," I insisted. "I'm an artist. I have a career." "Why can't he see that?" "Because it's not a career he understands," Daniel said, slipping under the covers. "Give it time. Once you start making more money with your art, he'll come around." I lay awake long after Daniel fell asleep, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above us. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I loved my husband, but I was beginning to see a troubling pattern. Daniel didn't stand up to his father because deep down he shared some of Richard's views. He supported my art as a husband humoring his wife's interests, not as a partner respecting my profession. The 3rd summer reunion is where my story truly begins, the turning point that led to everything else. In the year leading up to it, my work had gained traction. My piece Digital Diaspora had been featured in an online art magazine, and I'd sold several pieces to corporate collections. But to the Bennetts, I was still just Daniel's wife who was good with the dessert course. We arrived at Cedar Lake on a sweltering Friday in July. Richard greeted us on the driveway, dress shirt perfectly pressed despite the heat. "Daniel, my boy," he boomed, embracing his son. "And Jennifer," he added, giving me a cursory kiss on the cheek. "Evelyn's been looking forward to your help in the kitchen. We're having 20 for dinner tonight." "No, how's your work going?" "No interest in my life over the past year. Just an immediate assignment." Daniel carried our bags inside while I followed Richard to the kitchen. Evelyn was surrounded by grocery bags, looking overwhelmed. "Oh, Jennifer, thank goodness. I didn't have time to marinate the steaks or prep the vegetables. Richard invited the Harrisons and the Winthrops last minute." Just like that, my weekend was mapped out for me. Chopping, stirring, serving, cleaning. I tied on an apron and got to work alongside Evelyn, ignoring the sounds of laughter from the terrace where everyone else was enjoying cocktails. "Caroline's bringing her new boyfriend," Evelyn mentioned as we worked. "He's a surgeon she met at a charity gala." Richard is beside himself with excitement. The kitchen was stifling, the air conditioning failing to reach this part of the house. Sweat trickled down my back as I sliced vegetables for a crudité platter that would be devoured in minutes with no appreciation for the careful arrangement. Caroline arrived an hour later with Dr. James Whitfield, tall, conventionally handsome, and immediately embraced by Richard. "A cardiovascular surgeon. Well, we'll have to pick your brain over dinner," Richard declared, clapping James on the eye. "Back. Speaking of dinner," Daniel said, poking his head into the kitchen. "How's it coming along, hun? Everyone's getting hungry." "We're working as fast as we can," I replied, gesturing to the chaos around us. "Maybe someone could help set the table." "I'll ask Aunt Eloise," he promised. But instead, he was pulled into a conversation about James's hospital affiliation, and the task was forgotten. By the time we served dinner, a feast that had taken hours to prepare, I was exhausted and irritable. I took my seat beside Daniel, only to hear Richard ask James detailed questions about his surgical procedures while everyone listened, raptly. "And what about you, Jennifer?" James asked politely during a lull. "Daniel mentioned you're an artist?" Before I could answer, Richard chuckled. Jennifer keeps herself busy with her computer pictures, but her real talent is in the kitchen. This marinade is divine, isn't it? Digital art installation, I corrected quietly. I have a show next month at the Riverside Gallery. How nice, Aunt Eloise said in the tone one might use for a child's refrigerator drawing. Caroline, tell everyone about the hospital fundraiser you're chairing. After dinner, I was left to clear the table and load the dishwasher while everyone moved to the terrace for drinks. Only Evelyn stayed behind, silently washing the pots and pans that wouldn't fit in the dishwasher. Doesn't it bother you? I finally asked her. Being treated like the help in your own home? Evelyn paused, soapy hands hovering over the sink. It was different when I married Richard. Women of our class were expected to run the household. That was our contribution. She resumed scrubbing. Things have changed, but Richard hasn't. And you're okay with that? She didn't answer directly. Marriage requires compromise, Jennifer. You find happiness where you can. I thought about Evelyn's abandoned piano career, the way her hands still moved with a musician's grace as she worked in the kitchen. What compromises had she made over the decades? What parts of herself had she surrendered to maintain peace? Later that night, as Daniel and I prepared for bed in our cabin, my phone pinged with an email notification. Exhausted, I almost ignored it until I saw the sender: National Digital Arts Competition. My heart raced as I opened it, then nearly stopped as I read the first line. Congratulations! We are pleased to inform you that your work, Glass Ceilings, has been awarded first place in this year's National Digital Arts Competition. I gasped audibly, causing Daniel to look up from his book. What is it? I won, I stammered, still reading. The national competition. First place. Daniel put his book down. That's great, honey. The one you entered last spring? I nodded, continuing to read. The prize included $75,000, a feature in Art Tech magazine, and, most incredibly, a televised segment on PBS's American Innovators program showcasing my work and creative process. They want to film me discussing my installation, I said, trying to absorb the magnitude of what was happening. And it's going to air on PBS next month. That's amazing, Daniel said, giving me a hug. We should tell everyone tomorrow at breakfast. Dad will finally have to acknowledge your work now. Something in me hesitated. Actually, I'd rather keep it quiet for now. Why? This is huge news. I couldn't fully articulate my reasons, but I knew I didn't want Richard to diminish this. Achievement with faint praise, or to suddenly show interest only because external validation had made my work legitimate in his eyes. I just want to process it myself first, I said. The producer will be contacting me about filming details, and I want to have more information before making announcements. Daniel looked puzzled, but shrugged. Whatever makes you happy, but I'm really proud of you, he added, kissing my forehead before returning to his book. As he read, I reread the email several times, each time feeling a strange mixture of elation and simmering anger. For years, I'd worked tirelessly on my art while being treated as nothing more than domestic help by my in-laws. The award validated what I'd always known but couldn't make them see, that my work had value, meaning, purpose. That night, as Daniel slept peacefully beside me, I made a decision. I wouldn't just accept this award quietly. I would use it to reclaim my identity, in the eyes of the Bennett family, especially Richard. The PBS segment was scheduled to air in exactly 4 weeks, coincidentally on the Saturday night of the extended family dinner during the reunion. The dinner where Richard always made speeches about family achievements, highlighting Caroline's latest professional triumph or cousin's academic awards. This year, I would be prepared. The next morning, while helping Evelyn prepare breakfast, naturally, I received a call from the competition director, Sophia Martinez. I stepped onto the porch for privacy. Jennifer, congratulations again, Sophia began. I wanted to discuss the filming schedule for the PBS segment. We typically film in the artist's workspace, and we like to include a personal element, family members reacting to the work. Would your husband be available? A plan began forming in my mind. Actually, I have a different idea. My in-laws are having a family reunion at Cedar Lake 4 weeks from now, the same weekend the segment will air. What if we arrange to capture their reactions when they see the broadcast? Sophia paused. A surprise viewing? That could be compelling television. Tell me more about your in-laws. I gave her a careful, edited version of the dynamic, how my father-in-law was an academic who hadn't fully appreciated my artistic career, how the family reunion would gather all the Bennetts in one place. To be honest, I added, it would mean a lot to have my work recognized in front of my husband's family. They've never really understood what I do. I love it, Sophia decided. We'll film your studio segments next week, then arrange for a discreet camera crew at the reunion to capture the viewing. Just make sure everyone's gathered to watch PBS at 8 p.m. that Saturday. After confirming details, I rejoined the family for breakfast, a secret warmth spreading through me as I poured coffee for Richard and listened to him pontificate about Caroline's boyfriend's surgical innovations. For once, his dismissiveness didn't sting. In 4 weeks, everything would change. Over the next few days at the lake, I played my assigned role perfectly, cooking, cleaning, smiling politely through Richard's subtle digs about my computer hobby. But inside, I was transformed. Each condescending comment, each time I was summoned from conversation to handle some domestic task, I mentally added it to the reckoning that would come. On our final morning, as we packed to leave, Richard patted my shoulder. You've been a tremendous help this weekend, Jennifer. What would we do without you in the kitchen? I smiled, meeting his eyes directly. I've been wondering the same thing. Richard. He chuckled, missing my meaning entirely. See you both in 4 weeks for the big extended family weekend. Caroline will be announcing her hospital's new wing named after James's mentor. A big moment for the Bennetts by association. Wouldn't miss it for the world, I replied, thinking of a different announcement altogether. On the drive home, Daniel noticed my changed mood. You seem lighter somehow. Despite all the kitchen duty. I've had a revelation, I said honestly, about your family, about my place in it, about what matters to me. That sounds ominous, he joked. Not ominous, I corrected, clarifying. In the weeks that followed, I worked intensely with the PBS crew, filming segments about my creative process and discussing the themes of glass ceilings, how structures of power remain invisible until they're broken, how society assigns value based on credentials rather than contribution. During one interview, the producer asked why this particular piece resonated with so many people. Because it makes visible what we feel but can't always articulate, I explained. The way we're sorted and valued based on where we fit in pre-existing hierarchies. The way some voices are amplified while others are silenced, despite having just as much to say. Is this theme personal for you? She probed. I thought of Richard, of Evelyn's abandoned piano career, of countless family gatherings where my thoughts and work were considered irrelevant. Very, I answered simply. As the next reunion approached, I prepared methodically. I packed my usual casual clothes for kitchen duty, but also included a sleek black dress for after the broadcast. I rehearsed calm, measured responses to the questions I anticipated. Most importantly, I spoke with Daniel, finally sharing my feelings about how his family, particularly his father, had treated me over the years. I've felt diminished, Daniel. Like my work doesn't matter because it doesn't fit their definition of success. To his credit, he listened without interrupting, growing increasingly troubled as I recounted specific incidents he'd overlooked. I had no idea it was this bad, he admitted. I'm so sorry, Jenny. I should have seen it. The PBS segment airing during the reunion isn't a coincidence, I confessed. I arranged it deliberately. I need your father, all of them, to see me as I am, not as the person they've decided I should be. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. You know, my mother was a talented pianist before she married Dad. Sometimes I hear her playing when she thinks no one's home. She could have had a career of her own. I know, I said gently. I don't want that for us, he continued. I don't want you looking back 20 years from now wondering what you might have become if you hadn't been busy proving your worth to my family. He took my hand. I'll do better, starting at this reunion. I squeezed his hand, grateful but realistic. This isn't just about you standing up for me, though I appreciate that. It's about me standing up for myself. The day we drove back to Cedar Lake, I felt a strange calm. The insecurities that had plagued me during previous visits were gone, replaced by a clear-eyed purpose. Whatever happened after the broadcast, the dynamic between me and the Bennetts would be forever changed, for better or worse. We arrived at Cedar Lake just before noon. The compound looked the same, imposing, beautiful, exclusive, but I saw it differently now. No longer intimidated by its grandeur, I observed it as an outsider might, a showcase of privilege that the Bennetts had mistaken for inherent superiority. Richard and Evelyn greeted us on the front porch, Richard in his customary pressed khakis and button-down despite the summer heat. "Daniel, my boy," he called, embracing his son before turning to me with the perfunctory kiss on the cheek I'd come to expect. "Jennifer, Evelyn's been waiting for you. We're having lobster tonight, and you know how she struggles with the preparation." It took genuine effort not to roll my eyes. Instead, I smiled pleasantly. "Happy to help, Richard. But first, I'll need to set up my laptop in our cabin. I have a work deadline this weekend." He frowned slightly. "Work deadline? Surely your computer pictures can wait until after the family weekend." "Digital art installation," I corrected, maintaining my smile. "And no, it can't wait. But don't worry, I've scheduled my work around meal preparations." Richard looked to Daniel with an expression that clearly said, "Control your wife." To my surprise and satisfaction, Daniel placed his hand on my lower back supportively. "Jenny's been commissioned for an important project, Dad. We'll both help with dinner, but her work needs to come first sometimes." A flash of surprise crossed Richard's face before his social veneer reasserted itself. Of course. Family supports each other's endeavors?" He gestured vaguely toward the house. "Your mother's in the kitchen." I squeezed Daniel's hand gratefully before heading inside to find Evelyn. My mother-in-law stood surrounded by grocery bags, looking flustered in a way that had become all too familiar. "Jennifer, thank goodness," she sighed when she saw me. "Richard invited 4 more couples without telling me until yesterday. I've been scrambling to adjust the menu." "I'll help after I get settled," I promised, giving her a quick hug. "But I have a work commitment this weekend that I need to manage, as well." Unlike her husband, Evelyn looked genuinely interested. "Your art? Anything exciting?" For a moment, I was tempted to tell her about the award and upcoming broadcast. Of all the Bennetts, Evelyn might actually appreciate what it meant to have creative work recognized after years of having it dismissed. But the moment wasn't right. "Just a project with a tight deadline," I said instead. "Actually, there's something I wanted to ask you. Could we make sure the TV in the great room is tuned to PBS tomorrow night at 8? There's a special program on American artists I'd love to watch." "Of course, dear, though Richard usually watches financial news at that hour." "I think he might find this program interesting too," I said, unable to suppress a small smile. "Very educational." By the time I returned from setting up my laptop in our cabin, the house was bustling with arriving family members. Caroline and Dr. James had claimed the prime guest room in the main house. Cousins, aunts, and uncles filtered in, exclaiming over the lake view as if they hadn't seen it countless times before. And true to form, within minutes of entering the kitchen to help Evelyn, I was handed an apron and a list of tasks while the others gathered on the terrace for pre-lunch drinks. I worked methodically, keeping my interactions pleasant but brief. Several times I excused myself to check on my project, using these breaks to respond to emails from Sophia about tomorrow's filming arrangements and to simply breathe away from the Bennett family dynamic. During one such respite, Daniel found me sitting on our cabin's small porch, laptop open but untouched as I gazed at the lake. "You okay?" he asked, sitting beside me. "You're quieter than usual." "Just pacing myself," I replied honestly. 3. Days of being the family workhorse requires strategic energy management. Daniel winced. "I talked to Mom about dinner. She's going to ask Caroline and Aunt Eloise to handle dessert so you're not stuck with everything." I leaned against his shoulder, genuinely touched. "Thank you for that. I should have done it years ago." He hesitated. "Jenny, watching you with my family today, I'm starting to see what you've been trying to tell me. The way Dad speaks to you, the assumptions everyone makes about your role here." "Better late than never," I said without bitterness. "Tomorrow would change everything anyway. Why hold on to resentment now?" That evening's dinner proceeded with the usual Bennett family theatrics. Richard held court at the head of the table, interrogating James about hospital politics while sprinkling in boasts about Caroline's charity work. Aunt Eloise discussed her son's law firm partnership. Uncle Philip detailed his recent judicial appointment. When the conversation turned to Cousin Margaret's research grant, I felt Daniel tense beside me, clearly noticing for the first time how achievement was the only currency valued at this table, and how my contributions remained invisible. "Jennifer's artwork was featured in Architectural Digest last month," he announced during a brief lull. "A corporate headquarters in Seattle commissioned her digital installation for their main lobby." The table fell momentarily silent. Richard recovered. "First?" his smile not reaching his eyes. "How nice. Digital decoration is becoming quite popular in office spaces, isn't it? Much cheaper than original artwork, I imagine." I felt Daniel beginning to bristle beside me, but I placed my hand on his knee under the table. This wasn't the moment for confrontation. Tomorrow would speak for itself. "The installation responds to human movement throughout the day," I explained calmly. "It changes based on foot traffic patterns, essentially creating a new piece of art each day that reflects how people interact with the space." "Clever," Evelyn said with genuine interest. "Like having a living painting." "Exactly," I smiled at her. "Speaking of living things," Richard redirected smoothly, "James was telling me about his revolutionary cardiac procedure. And just like that, I was dismissed from the conversation. But this time, I didn't feel the familiar sting of exclusion. Instead, I observed the family dynamics with newfound clarity, how Richard controlled the narrative, how everyone deferred to his judgment about what topics deserved attention, how achievements were only significant if they aligned with his narrow definition of success. After dinner, I was predictably left with kitchen cleanup while the others moved to the fire pit by the lake for drinks. As I loaded the dishwasher, Evelyn appeared unexpectedly at my side. "Go join them," she said, taking a plate from my hands. "I'll finish up here." "It's okay. I don't mind." "Jennifer," she interrupted gently, "I've been watching you today. You're different somehow, more contained. And I realized I've been complicit in something I shouldn't have been." She gestured toward the window where we could see the family gathered around the fire. "Go be with your husband. Be part of the conversation, not the help." Surprised and touched, I hugged her impulsively. "Thank you, Evelyn." She seemed startled by the gesture, but returned it after a moment. "We'll talk more tomorrow," she promised. I joined the fireside gathering, wedging myself into the space beside Daniel. He wrapped an arm around me automatically, but I noticed Richard's momentary frown at my appearance. "Dishes all done?" he asked, the question carrying the assumption that my presence wasn't expected until my chores were complete. Evelyn insisted on finishing up, I replied pleasantly. That's unlike her, Richard remarked. She knows her way around a kitchen better than anyone. Perhaps she thought I deserved a break, I suggested, keeping my tone light. After all, I've been cooking since we arrived. An uncomfortable silence fell. Daniel's arm tightened around me, and I could feel his silent support. Caroline looked between her father and me with undisguised curiosity, clearly sensing the subtle shift in dynamics. James, bless him, jumped in with a question about local boating regulations, easing the tension. The conversation resumed, and if I participated more assertively than usual, offering opinions on topics beyond recipe techniques, no one commented directly. But I caught Richard watching me with a puzzled expression several times, as if trying to identify what had changed. Later that night, as Daniel and I prepared for bed in our cabin, he asked, "Are you nervous about tomorrow? The PBS thing?" "Not nervous," I replied, smoothing moisturizer over my face. "Ready?" "They're going to be shocked," he predicted. "Yes," I agreed. "That's rather the point." The next morning dawned bright and clear. Perfect Michigan summer weather. I woke early, before Daniel, and sat on our porch watching the lake sparkle in the morning light. In just over 12 hours, everything would change. I felt strangely calm, as if I'd already crossed an invisible threshold. When Daniel stirred, I brought him coffee in bed, not out of servitude, but as a gesture of partnership on this significant deep. "What's the plan?" he asked, sipping gratefully. "I'll help with breakfast as expected," I outlined. "Then I need to check in with Sophia about tonight's filming. The crew will arrive around 7:30 and set up discreetly outside. They'll come in after the segment airs." "And you're sure about this? Revealing everything so publicly?" I considered his question seriously. "I'm not doing this to embarrass your family, Daniel. I'm doing it because I've been invisible to them for 3 years. Because your father has dismissed my work, and by extension, me as a person with something valuable to contribute. Because I'm tired of being defined solely by my usefulness in the kitchen." He nodded slowly. "I understand. And I'm with you. 100%. True to my plan, I helped Evelyn prepare breakfast for the extended family, now numbering nearly 30 people with all cousins and their partners present. As we worked, I noticed she watched me with curious eyes, perhaps sensing my anticipation. "You seem happy this morning," she observed as we arranged fruit platters. "I am," I confirmed. "I feel like things are finally aligning." She smiled. "Good. You deserve happiness, Jennifer. You're good for Daniel, whether Richard sees it or not." Throughout the day, I participated in family activities while strategically taking breaks to work on my project. During these periods, I communicated with Sophia about final arrangements and mentally prepared for the evening ahead. By late afternoon, Richard had assumed his typical position as activities director, announcing plans for the evening. "Cocktails at 6, dinner at 7, he proclaimed as family members lounged on the terrace. After dinner, I thought we'd have our traditional family recognition ceremony. Caroline and James have their announcement about the hospital wing, and I believe Philip has news about his judicial appointment. I approached casually, glass of lemonade in hand. "Actually, Richard, there's a special program on PBS at 8 that I'd really like to watch. It's about American artists and innovation." He frowned slightly. "We can record it, surely. The family ceremony is our tradition." "This particular program can't wait," I insisted pleasantly. "But perhaps we could start the ceremony at 8:30? It would give everyone time to digest dinner properly." Richard looked ready to object when Daniel appeared at my side. "Dad, the PBS program is important to Jenny. We can adjust the timing just this once." Richard's eyebrows rose at his son's unusual firmness, but after a moment, he nodded reluctantly. Fine. Cocktails, dinner, television program, then family announcements? though I can't imagine what's so pressing about an art show. You might be surprised, I murmured, but he had already turned away to discuss cocktail preparations with Evelyn. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity. I helped prepare dinner as expected, though I noticed both Evelyn and Caroline pitching in more than usual, relieving me of some tasks I typically handled alone. Whether this was Daniel's influence or an organic shift, I appreciated the change. As 6 o'clock approached, I excused myself to change for dinner. In our cabin, I carefully applied makeup and styled my hair. Not elaborately, but with more attention than I typically devoted to family gatherings where I'd spend most of my time in the kitchen. I chose a simple but elegant black dress that I'd packed specifically for after the broadcast, but decided to wear it from the start of the evening. When I emerged, Daniel whistled softly. "You look beautiful," he said. "Ready to shake things up?" "More than ready," I confirmed, taking his arm. We walked together to the main house, where cocktail hour was already underway on the terrace. Heads turned as we entered, conversations pausing briefly as family members registered my unexpectedly polished appearance. Richard, mid-anecdote with Uncle Philip, did a visible double-take before recovering his composure. "Jennifer," he greeted, me, eyes flickering over my dress. "You look festive. Special occasion?" "In a manner of speaking," I replied enigmatically, accepting a glass of wine from a passing cousin. Throughout cocktails and dinner, I felt a subtle shift in dynamics. Perhaps it was my outfit, or my newfound confidence, or simply that I was participating in conversation rather than shuttling between kitchen and dining room. But family members engaged with me differently. They asked questions about my work, superficial ones, but questions nonetheless. They registered my presence at the table as more than just the person who had prepared the food. Richard, however, seemed increasingly discomfited by this change. Several times, I caught him watching me with a furrowed brow, as if trying to solve a puzzle. When I offered an informed opinion on arts funding and public education, directly contradicting his position, he actually blinked in surprise before launching into a rebuttal. As 7:45 approached, I excused myself briefly, stepping outside to confirm the PBS crew had arrived. A text from Sophia confirmed they were in position, hidden from view but ready to capture reactions after the broadcast. Returning inside, I found Evelyn clearing dishes with Caroline's reluctant assistance. "Let me finish here," I offered. "You've both worked hard enough today." "But you always," Caroline began. "Not tonight," I said firmly. "Tonight's different." Leaving them looking puzzled, I moved to the great room where family members were migrating for after-dinner drinks. Richard stood by the fireplace, already holding court about Caroline's hospital achievement, clearly trying to begin his ceremony despite the agreed schedule change. With deliberate casualness, I picked up the television remote and turned on the large screen that dominated one wall of the room. "It's nearly 8, I announced. "The PBS program I mentioned is about to start." Richard paused mid-sentence, irritation flashing across his face. "Jennifer, we're in the middle of—" "It's just an hour, Dad," Daniel interrupted, moving to stand beside me. "Then we'll have the family announcements as planned." The television flickered to life, tuned to PBS as I'd arranged with Evelyn earlier. A program about wildlife was just ending. Family members settled onto couches and chairs, drinks in hand, some looking curious about what had prompted my unusual insistence, others clearly impatient for Richard's ceremony to begin. As the wildlife credits rolled, the announcer's voice filled the room. Next on PBS, American Innovators presents Breaking Barriers, Digital Artists Reshaping Our Visual Landscape. I felt Daniel's hand slip into mine as the familiar theme music played. Richard had taken a seat in his favorite armchair, expression resigned but attentive. Evelyn and Caroline had joined us, completing the family circle just as the host appeared on screen. Tonight, we explore how digital artists are revolutionizing our understanding of visual art through technology and innovation, the host began. Our featured artist this evening has created what critics are calling a watershed moment in interactive digital expression. Please join me in welcoming the winner of this year's National Digital Arts Competition, Jennifer Taylor Bennett. A collective gasp filled the room as my face appeared on screen. The camera panned across my installation glass ceilings as my recorded voice described the concept behind the work. Every eye in the room swiveled from the television to me, expressions ranging from shock to confusion to dawning comprehension. Richard's reaction was everything I had anticipated. His mouth literally fell open, his drink tilting dangerously in his slackened grip. Beside him, Evelyn's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with surprise and what looked like delight. Caroline stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, while around the room, aunts, uncles, and cousins murmured in astonishment. On screen, I spoke eloquently about digital art as a medium for examining social structures and invisible barriers. The host described my rise in the art world, emphasizing the groundbreaking nature of my work and the unanimous decision of the judges to award me first place in the $75,000 prize. Ms. Taylor Bennett's work challenges our perceptions of value and achievement, the host continued. Her installation responds to human presence, creating unique experiences for each viewer while questioning who gets to define success in our society. The irony of this statement in the context of the Bennett family gathering was almost too perfect. I kept my expression neutral, though inside I was cataloging every reaction around me. Daniel's hand squeezed mine supportively as the program continued with critical analysis of my techniques and vision. When the segment shifted to an interview portion filmed in my studio, I finally looked directly at Richard. His initial shock had morphed into something more complex, disbelief tinged with what might have been embarrassment as he realized how thoroughly he had misjudged me. For nearly 20 minutes, the program highlighted my artistic journey, my innovative approach to digital media, and the significant recognition this award represented in the art world. As it neared conclusion, the host addressed the camera directly. Jennifer Taylor Bennett's glass ceilings will be featured in museums across the country next year and has already been acquired for the permanent collection at the Museum of Modern Art. This remarkable achievement marks her as one of the most significant emerging artists of our time. As the program ended and credits rolled, the room remained in stunned silence. I stood, smoothing my dress, and addressed the family. "So that's my news for the family recognition ceremony," I said calmly. I was going to mention it during Richard's traditional announcements, but the timing of the broadcast couldn't be helped. This broke the spell. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once, exclaiming, questioning, moving toward me with newfound interest. Caroline reached me first, her expression a mixture of confusion and newfound respect. "Why didn't you tell anyone? This is major, Jennifer." "I tried, many times," I replied evenly. "But kitchen duties usually took precedence over discussions about my career." She had the grace to look embarrassed. Behind her, aunts and cousins pressed forward with congratulations that felt surreal after years of disinterest. Only Richard remained seated, watching the scene unfold with an unreadable expression. Daniel stepped up beside me, his arm around my waist. "Maybe now's a good time to mention the camera crew outside," he suggested quietly. I nodded, and he slipped away momentarily, returning with Sophia and 2 cameramen who had been waiting on the porch. Their appearance caused another ripple of surprise through the family. "Everyone, this is Sophia Martinez, director of the National Digital Arts Competition," I introduced. "They're filming a follow-up segment about family reactions to the broadcast. We'd love to capture authentic responses to Jennifer's tremendous achievement," Sophia explained smoothly, signaling her crew to begin filming. "Mr. Bennett, as Jennifer's father-in-law, perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts first?" All eyes turned to Richard, who looked genuinely at a loss, perhaps for the first time in his life. He stood slowly, straightening his shoulders as he processed this unexpected shift in the family power dynamic. The man who had relegated me to kitchen duty while dismissing my computer pictures was now being asked to comment on my national recognition in front of cameras. Well, this is certainly unexpected, he began, clearly struggling to regain his equilibrium. Jennifer has always been creative. We just didn't realize the extent of her, that is to say, the significance of her work in the broader artistic community. To clarify, Sophia pressed gently, were you aware of the scale of Jennifer's artistic career before tonight's broadcast? Richard glanced around at the family, aware that any dishonesty would be immediately apparent to everyone present. I perhaps didn't fully appreciate the professional nature of her artistic endeavors, he admitted stiffly. Richard, Evelyn, stepped forward, her voice uncharacteristically firm. Jennifer has been telling us about her work for years. We just weren't listening. She turned to me, eyes bright with emotion. I'm so proud of you, dear, and ashamed that it took national recognition for us to see what was right in front of us. Her honest acknowledgement nearly undid my careful composure. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gratefully. Jennifer has often helped in the kitchen during family gatherings, Sophia continued, addressing Richard again. How do you feel about having a nationally recognized artist preparing your meals? The question was pointed but delivered with professional neutrality. Richard's face flushed slightly as he recognized the corner he'd been backed into. Family gatherings involve everyone contributing their talents, he replied carefully. Jennifer has many talents, clearly more than I recognized. Would you say this recognition changes how you view Jennifer's career choice? Sophia persisted. Richard looked directly at me for the first time since the broadcast began. Something shifted in his expression, not quite apologetic, but perhaps the closest to it I'd ever seen. It appears I've underestimated both the significance and the substance of Jennifer's work, he acknowledged. This recognition certainly puts things in perspective. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Richard Bennett, it was tantamount to one. I nodded, accepting this concession for what it was. The cameras continued rolling as other family members offered their congratulations and reactions, many admitting they had never fully understood what I did. Caroline, to her credit, seemed genuinely excited once she overcame her initial surprise. I can't believe I've been treating an award-winning artist like kitchen help, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. God, Jen, why didn't you just tell us all to stuff it years ago? Would you have listened? I asked simply. Her chagrined expression was answer enough. Through it all, Daniel remained at my side, fielding questions about whether he'd known about the award, yes, and why he hadn't announced it at previous family gatherings, respecting my wishes to reveal it my way. His pride was evident, but what moved me most was his unwavering support of my choice to orchestrate this moment on my terms. After nearly an hour of filming, Sophia signaled that they had enough material. As the crew packed up their equipment, family members clustered in small groups, the traditional recognition ceremony forgotten in the wake of the evening's unexpected turn. Evelyn approached me, taking both my hands in hers. Will you show me your studio sometime? She asked quietly. I'd love to understand more about what you create. I'd like that, I replied sincerely. And perhaps, she added, even more softly, you could come hear me play piano someday, when Richard is out. The vulnerability in this request brought tears to my eyes. I'd be honored, Evelyn. As the evening wound down, Richard approached where Daniel and I stood by the terrace doors. His demeanor was different, less commanding, more contemplative. Jennifer, he began, then paused as if recalibrating. I owe you an apology. It seems I've been incorrect in my assessment of your work. Not just my work, I replied calmly, but me as a person, as a member of this family. He nodded slowly, accepting this extension of his apology. Yes, that too. He cleared his throat uncomfortably, The kitchen duties? That was never intentional. It just seemed to be where you fit. Because you never looked for where I might actually belong, I pointed out. You decided my place and expected me to accept it. Another nod, more thoughtful this time. I'm beginning to see that. It seems I have some reconsideration to do. We all do, Daniel added, his arm secure around my waist. This family has some patterns that need breaking. Richard glanced between us, perhaps truly seeing us as a unit for the first time. Your mother was a brilliant pianist, he said suddenly, the non sequitur surprising us both. Did you know she was offered a place at Juilliard before we met? I didn't, Daniel replied, clearly startled by this revelation. She chose me instead, Richard continued, a new note of reflection in his voice. I never asked her to give it up entirely, but somehow, over the years, he trailed off, looking across the room where Evelyn was showing Caroline something on her phone, animated in a way I rarely saw her. Perhaps there are many things I failed to see clearly. With that uncharacteristically humble observation, he excused himself, moving to join his wife with a gentleness I hadn't witnessed before. Later that night, as Daniel and I returned to our cabin under a canopy of stars, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not triumphant exactly. This hadn't been about defeating Richard or humiliating the family. It had been about claiming my space, insisting on recognition not just for my work, but for my personhood. Do you think anything will really change? Daniel asked as we prepared for bed. With Dad? With the family dynamics? I don't know, I answered honestly. Change like that doesn't happen overnight, but at least now there's a crack in the facade. A possibility. He pulled me close, dropping a kiss on my forehead. I'm so proud of you. Not just for the award, though, that's incredible, but for how you handled tonight. It would have been easy to be vindictive after the way they've treated you. That wouldn't have solved anything, I replied, settling against his chest. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition, not just for my art, but for who I am beyond their expectations. As we drifted toward sleep, I thought about Evelyn and her hidden piano playing, about Richard's belated recognition of what his wife had sacrificed, about the subtle shifts I'd witnessed throughout the evening among various family members. One televised moment wouldn't transform the Bennett family overnight, but it had created an opening, a chance for new patterns to emerge. Tomorrow, I would still help with breakfast, not because it was expected, but because I chose to. And afterward, I'd join the family for the boat ride on the lake, not as the designated photographer or lunch packer, but as Jennifer Taylor Bennett, artist and equal member of this complicated family. My place at the table, literally and figuratively, would never be the same again. And neither would I. The morning after the PBS broadcast brought subtle but unmistakable changes to the Bennett family dynamic. I woke early, sunlight streaming, through the cabin windows, and found Daniel already up, making coffee on the small kitchenette counter. Morning, famous artist, he greeted me with a smile, handing me a steaming mug. Ready to face the New World Order? I sipped the coffee, savoring both the flavor and the novelty of not being the one preparing breakfast for everyone else. One revelation doesn't change a family's entire culture overnight, I reminded him. But it's a start. We took our time walking to the main house, hand in hand along the dewy path bordered by hydrangeas in full bloom. The typical morning rush of breakfast preparation would already be underway, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt no anxiety about being late to help. Inside, we found unexpected activity in the kitchen. Caroline stood at the stove flipping pancakes with focused determination, while Evelyn arranged fruit on a platter. Richard, surprisingly, was setting the dining table, a task I'd always handled. He looked up as we entered, a flicker of something. Embarrassment? Acknowledgement? Crossing his face before he nodded a greeting. "Good morning," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Coffee's fresh." "Thanks, Dad," Daniel replied, leading me toward the kitchen island where several family members were already gathered, nursing coffees and scrolling through phones. "Jennifer!" Aunt Eloise called, uncharacteristically warm. "I was just reading about your award online. The Times has a whole article about the competition. Did you know you're trending on Twitter?" Before I could respond, Caroline turned from the stove, spatula in hand. "Trending? Let me see." She abandoned her pancake station to peer over her, Aunt's shoulder, nearly burning breakfast in the process. "Careful there, chef," I teased gently, sliding into position to rescue the bubbling pancake. Caroline surrendered the spatula with a sheepish grin. "Sorry, I'm a disaster at this. I don't know how you make it look so easy." "Practice," I replied, flipping the pancake to reveal a perfectly golden underside. Years of being the designated cook will do that. My comment, delivered without rancor but with clear-eyed honesty, created a moment of awkward silence. Caroline had the grace to look embarrassed. "Well, maybe now we can arrange a more equitable distribution of labor," Evelyn suggested, her voice carrying a new note of authority that turned heads. "Starting with breakfast duty rotations." Richard, returning from the dining room, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Instead, he reached for the coffee pot, refilling cups around the island, including mine, a small service I couldn't recall him ever performing before. As family members filtered down for breakfast, each interaction carried a different tenor than previous mornings. Cousin Margaret, who had barely acknowledged me in the past, asked detailed questions about my digital techniques. Uncle Philip, the federal judge, engaged me in conversation about copyright law for digital artwork. Even Caroline's boyfriend, James, who had previously directed all his attention toward the Bennett achievers, sought my opinion on incorporating digital art into hospital healing environments. "We're renovating the children's wing," he explained, "and studies show interactive art installations can significantly impact patient recovery rates. I'd be happy to connect you with some colleagues who specialize in therapeutic digital environments," I offered, genuinely interested in the application. Throughout breakfast, I noticed Richard watching these interactions with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Not resentment exactly, but perhaps disorientation. A man accustomed to controlling the family narrative now observing it shift, without his direction. When plates were cleared, I stood to help with cleanup out of habit, but Evelyn waved me back to my seat. "Daniel and Caroline are on kitchen duty this morning," she announced firmly. "The schedule is posted on the refrigerator." Now, Caroline looked momentarily surprised but nodded, clearing plates with exaggerated care as if determined to prove herself capable of domestic tasks. Daniel winked at me from the sink, clearly enjoying this new arrangement. "Jennifer," Richard said suddenly, "I wonder if you might have time this morning to show me your artwork on your laptop. I'd like to better understand what you do." The request, delivered stiffly but seemingly sincere, caught me off guard. I studied his face, looking for signs of patronizing intent, but found only uncomfortable determination. The look of a man forcing himself to navigate unfamiliar territory. "I'd be happy to," I replied after a moment. "Why don't we meet on the porch in half an hour?" He nodded briskly and excused himself, while around us, family members exchanged surprised glances. Richard Bennett did not typically seek tutorials from those he considered subordinate, which had clearly included me until yesterday's broadcast. "What just happened?" Caroline stage whispered to her mother. "Growth, hopefully," Evelyn replied, with a small, private smile in my direction. 30 minutes later, I sat with my father-in-law on the screened porch overlooking the lake, my laptop open between us. The morning sun dappled the water with gold, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh water through the screens. Under different circumstances, it might have been pleasant. Richard sat stiffly beside me, hands resting on his knees, posture betraying his discomfort. Yet he had come, voluntarily placing himself in the position of student to my teacher. A significant role reversal for a man accustomed to being the family authority on all matters of importance. "So," he began awkwardly, "computers and art. How does that work exactly?" I suppressed a smile at the oversimplification but appreciated the effort. "Digital art encompasses many different approaches," I explained, opening my portfolio on screen. "My specialty is creating responsive environments that interact with human presence and movement." I showed him examples of previous installations, explaining how sensors captured data from viewers, their positions, movements, even breathing patterns, and translated this information into evolving visual landscapes. "The artwork is never static," I continued, navigating to the piece that had won the competition. "It's constantly responding to its environment and the people within it. In a way, the viewers become co-creators of the piece." Richard leaned closer, brow furrowed in concentration as he watched the demonstration video of glass ceilings. The installation featured transparent panels suspended at various heights, each displaying shifting patterns of light and color that responded to the movement of people beneath them. As viewers navigated the space, the ceilings above them either brightened or dimmed, raised or lowered, creating a visceral experience of how invisible barriers operate in social spaces. "The metaphor is rather pointed," Richard observed dryly. "Art usually is," I countered. "Its job is to make the invisible visible." He was quiet for a moment, watching the video play through. "And this commands $75,000? "The monetary award is just one form of recognition," I explained. "The museum acquisition and residency opportunity are actually more valuable professionally. They establish credibility in the art world that leads to commissioned installations like the one in Seattle that Daniel mentioned." "Which pays?" he probed, economics professor emerging despite himself. "Six figures," I answered simply. "Plus expenses for materials and installation team." I could almost see the recalculation happening behind his eyes. The adjustment of mental ledgers where my value had been previously recorded in columns labeled domestic contribution rather than financial asset or professional achievement. "I see," he said finally. Then, with visible effort, "I seem to have significantly misjudged the nature of your work." Coming from Richard Bennett, this was essentially an apology. I nodded, accepting it as such. "Digital art often faces that challenge," I replied, offering him a graceful exit. "It's still emerging as a recognized medium in traditional circles." He cleared his throat. "Perhaps, but that doesn't excuse my assumptions." He gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "About your proper role here." The acknowledgement hung between us, not quite the full reckoning that might have been warranted after years of subtle denigration, but a start. "I'm happy to help in the kitchen when it's a shared responsibility," I said carefully. What I objected to was being assigned that role exclusively, as if it were my only valuable contribution. Richard nodded slowly, fingers drumming lightly, on his knee, a habit I recognized from Daniel when he was processing uncomfortable truths. "Evelyn mentioned something similar this morning," he admitted. "About her piano." I remained silent, allowing him space to continue if he chose. "She was quite talented, you know. Before we married, competitions, scholarships to prestigious conservatories." His gaze drifted toward the lake. "Somehow, over the years, it became secondary. The children, my career, family obligations." He sighed. "She doesn't play much anymore." "But she still wants to," I suggested gently. He glanced at me sharply. "She told you that?" "Not directly, but sometimes. I hear her when she thinks no one's listening. She plays beautifully." Richard was quiet again, longer this time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a reflective quality I'd never heard before. "I never explicitly asked her to give it up. That's what I've told myself for 40 years. But I created conditions where her music became inconvenient, impractical." He shook his head slightly. I wonder how many other things I've missed or diminished through my particular lens of what matters. The vulnerability of this admission was so unexpected that for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. This was not the Richard Bennett I'd known for 3 years, the confident patriarch certain of his superior judgment. This was a man confronting the possibility that his worldview had significant blind spots. "It's never too late to see things differently," I offered finally, "to make space for what others value, even when it doesn't align with your own priorities." He nodded thoughtfully, then gestured to my laptop. "Show me more about your work. I want to understand." For the next hour, Richard Bennett, Professor Emeritus, economic theorist, and self-appointed arbiter of the family value system, listened attentively as I explained digital art concepts, technical approaches, and creative philosophies. He asked increasingly thoughtful questions, never once checking his watch or glancing toward the door as family members passed by, clearly surprised to see us engaged in such focused conversation. By the time we concluded, something subtle had shifted between us. Not friendship exactly, but a tentative mutual respect that hadn't existed before. "Thank you for the tutorial," he said as he stood to leave. "It's been enlightening." "Thank you for asking," I replied sincerely. He paused at the porch door. "The family is going boating this afternoon. I believe you usually stay behind to prepare lunch for our return." I tensed slightly, wondering if we were already reverting to established patterns. "However," he continued, surprising me, "Daniel mentioned you're quite good at sailing. Perhaps you'd like to join us on the water today. Caroline has volunteered to handle lunch preparation." The invitation wasn't delivered warmly. Richard Bennett didn't do warmth, but it represented a concrete acknowledgement of the conversation we'd just had. "I'd like that," I accepted. "Thank you." He nodded briskly and departed, leaving me alone on the porch with my laptop and a cautious sense of optimism. One morning's conversation wouldn't erase years of condescension or fundamentally change a man in his 70s. But it was a beginning, a crack in the facade of family hierarchy that might allow for new growth. When I rejoined the others in the great room, Daniel approached with curious eyes. "How was the art education session with Dad?" "Surprisingly productive," I replied. "He actually listened. And apparently, I'm invited on the boat today instead of being assigned lunch duty." Daniel's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously? Dad specifically mentioned that?" "He did. And get this, Caroline volunteered for kitchen duty." "Alternate universe," Daniel murmured, glancing toward where his sister was engaged in animated conversation with our niece. "Next thing you know, Uncle Philip will offer to wash dishes." "Let's not get carried away," I laughed. "Baby steps." Throughout the day, I observed similar small adjustments in family dynamics. Aunt Eloise, who had previously directed all her questions about my life to Daniel as if I couldn't speak for myself, engaged me directly about upcoming exhibitions. Cousin Margaret, historically dismissive of non-academic achievements, asked thoughtful questions about the technical aspects of digital installations. Even Caroline made visible efforts to include me in conversations where I would previously have been overlooked. The afternoon boating excursion highlighted these shifts most clearly. In past years, I'd been relegated to packing coolers and preparing sandwiches while the family enjoyed the lake. Today, I stood at the wheel of Richard's prized vintage wooden boat, demonstrating the sailing skills I'd developed during summers on Lake Michigan with my father before his death. "You handle her beautifully," Richard commented as I navigated through a tricky crosswind. "Where did you learn to sail?" "My dad taught me," I explained, making a slight adjustment to maintain our course. "He restored old boats as a hobby. We spent every summer on the water until he passed away when I was 15. "I didn't know that," Richard said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Daniel never mentioned your father was a sailor." "There's a lot about Jennifer you've never asked about, Dad," Daniel remarked from his position near the bow. Rather than bristling at the implied criticism, Richard nodded thoughtfully. Apparently so. That evening's dinner featured another notable change. I wasn't involved in its preparation at all. Caroline, with help from James and 2 cousins, managed a respectable pasta dinner while I relaxed on the terrace with Evelyn and Daniel, sipping wine and watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of amber and gold. "This is nice," Evelyn murmured, her shoulder touching mine companionably. "Having you out here instead of hidden away in the kitchen." "It is," I agreed, though I'm a little concerned about what we might be eating if Caroline's in charge. Daniel chuckled. "James is supervising. He's actually quite good in the kitchen, but he's been playing along with the Bennett family gender roles until now." "Smart man," Evelyn observed with uncharacteristic irony. "Sometimes it's easier to navigate the current than fight it directly." I glanced at her, wondering how many compromises she'd made over the decades of marriage to Richard, how many parts of herself she'd submerged to maintain family harmony. The thought made me reach for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Maybe the current is changing," I suggested. She returned the squeeze. "Perhaps it is." Dinner, when served, proved surprisingly edible. Simple but well executed, with only minor cooking mishaps evidenced by Caroline's slightly frazzled appearance and a faint smell of burning from something that hadn't made it to the table. "Well," Richard declared after taking his first bite, "this is entirely acceptable." From Richard, this constituted high praise for an unexpected source. Caroline beamed despite herself, shooting me a glance that seemed to say, "How do you do this every day?" I raised my glass to her in silent acknowledgement of both her effort and her newfound appreciation for what had previously been invisible: labor. As plates were cleared, by Daniel and James notably, Richard stood, commanding attention as was his habit at family gatherings. "Yesterday's events," he began, glancing briefly in my direction, "have prompted some reflection. It seems our family may have fallen into certain patterns of interaction that bear reconsideration." A murmur of surprise rippled through the gathered relatives. Richard Bennett did not typically engage in self-reflection, at least not publicly. "Jennifer's national recognition," he continued, "highlighted something I've been perhaps overlooking. There are many forms of achievement, many paths to excellence that might not align with traditional Bennett family metrics." I felt Daniel tense beside me, clearly as shocked as I was by this unexpected acknowledgement. "To that end," Richard continued, producing a folder from beside his chair, "I'd like to announce a slight modification to our traditional family recognition ceremony. In addition to celebrating Caroline's hospital wing announcement and Philip's judicial appointment, we have another achievement to acknowledge." He opened the folder and removed what appeared to be a professionally printed certificate. "The Bennett Family Arts Endowment," he announced, holding it up for all to see. "Established today with an initial fund of $50,000 to be administered by Jennifer as artistic director." Stunned silence greeted this proclamation. I stared at my father-in-law, trying to process what was happening. "The endowment will support emerging digital artists," Richard explained, "particularly those from non-traditional educational backgrounds who might otherwise be overlooked by established institutions." He extended the certificate toward me. After a moment's hesitation, I rose to accept it, scanning the official document with disbelief. It was legitimate, a legally established foundation with my name listed as director. "Richard," I began, uncertain what to say, "this is unexpected." "Yes, well," he replied, looking uncommonly self-conscious. "Yesterday's revelation suggested I might have been operating with insufficient data regarding the significance of your work. This seemed an appropriate correction." From Richard Bennett, this elaborate gesture constituted both apology and olive branch, delivered in the terms he best understood: institutional recognition and financial commitment. "Thank you," I said simply. "I'm honored to accept." A spattering, of applause broke out around the table, quickly building as family members registered the significance of what had just occurred. Richard Bennett had publicly acknowledged his error in judgment and taken concrete steps to rectify it, essentially unheard of in family memory. As I returned to my seat, certificate in hand, Daniel leaned close to whisper, "Did my father just create an endowment to apologize for being wrong about you?" "I believe he did," I murmured back. "Very Bennett of him, isn't it? Can't just say sorry like a normal person." Daniel chuckled. "Bennetts don't apologize. We establish institutions." The remainder of the evening unfolded with a noticeably lighter atmosphere. Richard's gesture seemed to have granted unspoken permission for other family members to recalibrate their own relationships with me. Conversations flowed more naturally, with fewer of the subtle hierarchical signals that had previously dominated Bennett family interactions. Most telling was a moment near the end of the evening when Evelyn quietly announced that she would be giving a small piano recital the following afternoon. "Nothing elaborate," she said, her voice containing only a slight tremor. "Just a few pieces I've been practicing recently." Richard, who had historically dismissed his wife's musical hobby, nodded with what appeared to be genuine encouragement. "Excellent idea. We should make good use of that, baby grand. It's been silent too long." The look Evelyn gave him, surprise, mingled with cautious hope, spoke volumes about their decades-long dynamic and the possibility that it too might be evolving, however belatedly. As family members began drifting toward their respective sleeping quarters, I found myself momentarily alone with Caroline near the dying embers of the fireplace. For once, her typically perfect appearance showed signs of wear, hair slightly disheveled from kitchen heat, a small sauce stain on her designer blouse. "I owe you an apology," she said abruptly. "Several, actually." I waited, giving her space to continue. She searched for words. "Dismissive. Of your work. Your contribution to the family. I just assumed because Dad did." "It's an easy pattern to fall into," I acknowledged. "The Bennett family hierarchy is pretty well established." "Still." She twisted her fingers together, an uncharacteristic display of discomfort from always composed. "Caroline, I should have made more effort to know you, to understand what you do. Instead, I just accepted the role assigned to you." "Thank you for recognizing that," I said simply. "That PBS segment," she continued. "Your work is actually incredible. The way you talked about digital environments responding to human presence, it was fascinating. I've been reading about your other installations online today." The genuine interest in her voice marked perhaps the most authentic conversation we'd had in 3 years of being sisters-in-law. "If you're interested," I offered, "I could show you more. Maybe even collaborate sometime. Your architectural background could bring interesting structural elements to a digital installation." Her face brightened. "Really? You'd want to work with me?" "Why not? We're family, aren't we?" The simple question hung between us, carrying more significance than might be immediately apparent. Were we truly family? Or had we been performing prescribed roles in Richard Bennett's carefully ordered world? Caroline the golden daughter, me the barely tolerated outsider relegated to domestic service? "We are," she agreed after a moment. "Or we could be properly, if I stopped being such a Bennett about everything." I laughed at her self-awareness. Being a Bennett isn't inherently problematic. The family just might need to expand its definition of what that means. Later, as Daniel and I walked back to our cabin under a canopy of stars, I found myself reflecting on the day's unexpected developments. "Your father created an endowment," I marveled, still processing the gesture. "That's quite a dramatic response to being proven wrong." Daniel laughed softly. "Dad's never been one for half measures. When he commits to something, even an apology, he goes all in." "Do you think it's genuine? Or just damage control after being embarrassed on camera?" Daniel considered this as we followed the path through moonlit gardens. Both, probably. Dad hates being wrong publicly, but the endowment, that's not just for show. He could have made a much smaller gesture if it were purely about appearances. We reached our cabin, climbing the short steps to the porch where Adirondack chairs waited invitingly beneath soft landscape lighting. "Let's sit for a while," I suggested, not quite ready to go inside. We settled into the chairs, the night wrapping. Around us with cricket songs and the gentle lapping of lake water against the distant shore. Above us, stars punctured the darkness in familiar patterns, the same constellations I'd watched as a child on Lake Michigan with my father. "Do you think anything's really changed?" I asked finally. "Or will everyone revert to type once the shock of the PBS revelation wears off?" Daniel reached for my hand across the space between our chairs. "Something's changed," he said firmly. "Maybe not everything, all at once. But the foundation has shifted. I saw it in Dad's face when he watched that segment about your work. Real recognition, maybe, for the first time. And your mother playing tomorrow," I added. "That feels significant." "Monumental," Daniel agreed. "I honestly can't remember the last time she played for the family. Dad always made comments about hobbyist skills whenever she mentioned it." We sat in contemplative silence for several minutes, listening to the night sounds and absorbing the events of the past 2 days. "Thank you," Daniel said suddenly. "For what?" "For not giving up. On me, on this family. You could have walked away after the first reunion when it became clear how they were positioning you." "I considered it," I admitted. "Especially after that second summer when your father made the housewife hobby comment." Daniel winced. "I should have stood up to him then. I'm sorry I didn't." "You're standing up now," I pointed out. "That matters." He squeezed my hand. "I've been thinking about what happens after this weekend. When we go back to real life. I don't want to slip back into old patterns." "What kind of patterns are you worried about?" "The way I sometimes prioritize my family's approval over your feelings, the way I've let Dad's value system influence our choices together." His honesty touched me deeply. "What do you want to do differently?" Daniel turned to face me in the dim light, his expression earnest. "I want us to make decisions based on what matters to us, not what impresses my family. I want to champion your work the way you deserve. And I want..." He hesitated, then continued more softly. "I want us to consider starting our own family, soon, on our terms, not according to the Bennett 5-year plan." This last part caught me by surprise. We'd discussed children theoretically, but always as a future consideration after I'd established myself, a timeline subtly influenced by Richard's opinions about appropriate career benchmarks. "You want to have a baby?" I clarified, heart suddenly racing. "I want us to decide together without my father's voice in our heads," Daniel replied. "Watching you stand in your power these past 2 days, seeing the way you transformed this family's dynamic without compromising who you are, it made me realize we've been living too much in my family's shadow. I'm ready for us to cast our own." Tears pricked unexpectedly behind my eyelids, not from the specific suggestion of starting a family, but from the profound shift it represented in our marriage. A declaration of independence from the Bennett family hierarchy that had shaped so many of our choices, spoken and unspoken. "I'd like that," I said softly, "making our decisions together, based on what we want, not what earns Bennett approval." Daniel stood, pulling me gently to my feet and into his arms. "I'm sorry it took a national television broadcast for me to fully see what was happening. That's on me." I laughed against his shoulder. "It was a pretty dramatic wake-up call." "Effective, though," he murmured into my hair. We stood together on the moonlit porch, embracing not just each other, but the possibility of a new chapter, one where Richard Bennett's approval rating no longer served as the primary metric for our life choices, where my voice carried equal weight in our shared future, where we defined success on our own terms. Tomorrow would bring Evelyn's piano recital and the final day of the reunion. There would undoubtedly be more adjustments, more recalibration of long-established family dynamics. Richard might backslide into old patterns. Other family members might revert to comfortable hierarchies once the novelty wore off. But something fundamental had shifted, like the tectonic plates beneath a seemingly stable landscape. The Bennett family would never be exactly the same, and neither would my place within it. I had claimed my space not through confrontation, but through excellence recognized beyond the family's closed circle, forcing acknowledgement on terms even Richard couldn't dismiss. As Daniel and I finally went inside, I thought about the name of my winning installation: glass ceilings. Some barriers remain invisible until they're broken, revealing the open sky beyond. The final day of the Bennett family reunion dawned with a clarity unusual for Michigan summers. No humidity, just pure sunshine and a gentle breeze rippling the lake's surface. I woke before Daniel, slipping quietly onto our cabin's porch with a cup of coffee to watch morning light transform the water from steel gray to brilliant blue. So much had changed in 48 hours that I needed this moment of solitude to process it all. The woman who had arrived at Cedar Lake dreading kitchen duty and subtle condescension was leaving as the director of a new arts endowment and the recipient of national recognition. More importantly, I was leaving with a fundamentally altered position in the Bennett family hierarchy, no longer the tolerated outsider, but a person of acknowledged value and accomplishment. A loon called across the water, its haunting cry echoing against distant shores. I smiled, remembering my father's voice. Loon calls are good omens, Jenny girl. They remind us that beauty can emerge from unexpected places. He would have enjoyed witnessing yesterday's revelations, particularly Richard's stunned expression during the PBS broadcast. My practical, working-class dad had never been intimidated by the trappings of wealth or status that defined the Bennett world. Money doesn't make you better, he'd say, just luckier in certain categories. The cabin door opened behind me, and Daniel emerged with his own coffee, hair tousled from sleep. "Morning," he murmured, bending to kiss the top of my head before settling into the adjacent chair. "You're up early." "Just thinking," I replied, watching sunlight dance across the water. "About everything that's happened, about what comes next." "Regrets?" he asked, studying my expression. I shook my head. "Not regrets, just awareness that things won't be simple. Your father made a grand gesture with the endowment, but that doesn't mean he's completely transformed overnight." "True," Daniel acknowledged. "Dad's capacity for backsliding is legendary, but something fundamental has shifted. I saw it in how he looked at you during dinner last night. Actual respect, maybe for the first time." We sat in comfortable silence, sipping coffee and watching a pair of kayakers glide across the distant water. The main house would already be stirring, breakfast preparations underway according to Evelyn's new rotation system. According to the schedule, it was Richard and James on duty this morning, a pairing I would have found unimaginable 3 days ago. "Are you nervous about your mom's recital today?" I asked. Daniel considered this. "Not nervous exactly, more curious. I can barely remember her performing. She used to play Christmas carols when we were very small, but even that faded as we got older." "Did you know she was offered a place at Juilliard before she married your father?" He nodded. "Dad mentioned it yesterday. First time I'd heard about it, though." "Do you think he feels guilty about her giving up music?" Daniel turned his coffee mug slowly between his palms. "Maybe, in his own way. Dad's not great at recognizing emotional patterns, especially his own. But something about your PBS segment seems to have triggered some self-reflection." "Better late than never," I mused. We finished our coffee and dressed for the day, meandering up to the main house where the aroma of fresh waffles greeted us. an unexpected culinary success from Richard and James's efforts. The kitchen revealed an unprecedented sight. Richard Bennett in an apron, carefully measuring vanilla extract while James monitored the waffle iron. "Good morning," Richard greeted us with surprising cheerfulness. "Belgian waffles with Evelyn's berry compote. James here has quite the culinary background, it turns out." "My mother owned a restaurant," James explained, flipping a perfectly golden waffle onto a warmer. "I worked there every summer through medical school." "Hidden talents," I remarked, meeting Richard's eyes directly. "Sometimes we miss them when we're focused on more conventional metrics of success." The pointed comment landed as intended. Richard had the grace to incline his head slightly, acknowledging the gentle rebuke. "Indeed. An oversight I'm working to correct." This small exchange, my confident critique, his acceptance of it, represented a seismic shift in our power dynamic. 3 days ago, I would have swallowed such observations to maintain peace. Now, I could speak my truth without fear of disapproval, and Richard was learning to receive it without bristling. Breakfast unfolded with a relaxed camaraderie unusual for Bennett gatherings. Family members drifted in and out, serving themselves, rather than waiting for designated kitchen staff, me, to attend to their needs. Conversation flowed naturally, with none of Richard's typical orchestration of topics to highlight certain achievements while minimizing others. Caroline joined us midway through, looking unusually casual in jeans and a simple blouse rather than her customary designer outfit. "Morning, everyone," she greeted, helping herself to coffee. "Jenny, do you have time today to show me some of your digital modeling techniques? I've been thinking about integrating responsive elements into my next architectural proposal." "I'd love to," I replied, genuinely pleased by her interest. "After your mom's recital, perhaps?" "Perfect." She slid into the chair beside me with none of her previous reserve. "I was reading about your Seattle installation last night. The way you integrated movement sensors with light patterns is fascinating from a structural perspective. As we discussed potential crossovers between architecture and digital art, I caught Richard watching us with an expression I'd never seen before. Something like wistful appreciation. Perhaps he was finally witnessing the kind of intellectual exchange between his daughter and daughter-in-law that he'd unwittingly prevented through years of rigid role assignment. After breakfast, family members dispersed to enjoy their final day at the lake. Some headed for the tennis courts, others prepared fishing gear or kayaks. Daniel was recruited for a sailing expedition with his uncles, leaving me with unexpected free time, a novelty during Bennett family gatherings where my schedule had always been determined by meal preparation responsibilities. I found Evelyn in the music room, seated at the rarely used baby grand piano, fingers moving silently over the keys as if rehearsing without sound. "May I join you?" I asked from the doorway. She looked up, momentarily startled, then smiled. "Please do. I'm just preparing for this afternoon, feeling a bit rusty." I settled into a nearby armchair, noticing sheet music arranged neatly on the piano's music stand. Chopin, Debussy, Schumann. Not beginner selections or simple parlor pieces, but challenging compositions requiring significant technical skill. "Those look ambitious," I observed. Evelyn's fingers continued their silent practice. "They're pieces I studied before Richard and I married. I've been practicing in private for years, but never quite had the courage to play them publicly." "What changed?" Her hands stilled on the keys. "Watching you yesterday," she said simply. "Seeing you claim your rightful place, your professional identity, despite years of being categorized as something less. It made me wonder what else I've surrendered too easily." The vulnerability in her admission touched me deeply. "It's never too late to reclaim parts of yourself," I offered gently. "At 70? She laughed softly. "Perhaps not to become a concert pianist, but to remember who I was before I became merely Richard's wife, or Daniel and Caroline's mother." "Yes, That seems worth pursuing, even now. She began to play then, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, a Chopin nocturne that filled the room with bittersweet melody. I sat quietly, watching her transformation as she surrendered to the music. The carefully coiffed, perpetually accommodating Evelyn Bennett faded away, replaced by a woman of genuine passion and artistic sensibility, her body swaying slightly with the emotional contours of the piece. When she finished, we both remained silent for a moment, honoring what had just transpired. Not merely a musical performance, but an act of reclamation. "That was beautiful," I said finally. "Thank you." Her smile contained both satisfaction and a hint of sadness for all the years of silence. "I've missed this more than I allowed myself to acknowledge. Will Richard come to your recital?" Her expression clouded slightly. "He says he will. In the past, he always found reasons to be elsewhere when I mentioned playing. Too busy with work calls, papers to grade, meetings to prepare for. And now?" She smoothed her hands over the piano's polished surface. "Now, I think he's genuinely trying to see me differently, whether that will last beyond this weekend." She shrugged delicately. 47 years of marriage teaches you to be cautiously optimistic about change. "Whatever happens," I told her, "play for yourself today. Not for Richard or the family or anyone's approval. Just for the joy of reclaiming what's yours." She reached over to squeeze my hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "When did you get so wise, Jennifer Taylor?" "Probably around the time I stopped seeking Bennett family validation and started valuing my own worth," I replied with a smile. I left Evelyn to her practice and wandered outside, enjoying the novel sensation of moving through the Bennett family compound without a to-do list or kitchen timer constraining my exploration. The property was extensive, nearly 12 acres of lakefront landscape dotted with gardens, wooded paths, and secluded sitting areas. In previous visits, I'd glimpsed these spaces only in passing, always hurrying back to domestic responsibilities. Today, I followed a stone path I'd never taken before, winding through tall pines to a small clearing overlooking a secluded cove. A weathered wooden bench faced the water, offering a perfect view of distant sailboats skimming across the main lake. I settled onto the bench, breathing deeply of pine-scented air and feeling strangely like a tourist in my in-laws' world rather than its designated servant. I was wondering who discovered my thinking spot. I turned to find Richard approaching, along the path, looking uncharacteristically casual in khakis and a polo shirt, rather than his usual button-down Oxford. "I'm sorry," I began, rising to leave. "I didn't realize this was your private area." "Please, stay," he said, gesturing for me to remain seated. "I'd welcome the company, if you don't mind sharing the view." Surprised by the invitation, I settled back onto the bench as he joined me, leaving a respectful distance between us. For several minutes, we sat in silence, watching light play across the water and listening to wind whisper through pine boughs overhead. "I discovered this spot first year we bought the property," Richard said eventually, "when the children were small and the main house was chaotic. I needed somewhere to recalibrate." "It's peaceful," I acknowledged. "I can see why you'd seek it out." He nodded, eyes on the horizon. "I've made many significant decisions here over the years. Career choices, investment strategies, educational plans for the children. Something about the perspective helps clarify thinking." I waited, sensing there was more behind this unusual confidence. "I came here last night," he continued, "after everyone had gone to bed, to think about what happened with your PBS recognition, about the patterns in our family that might be overdue for examination." "And what did you conclude?" I asked cautiously. Richard sighed, a sound containing the weight of 70 years of certitude now being questioned. "That I've been operating from an incomplete understanding. that perhaps my metrics for measuring worth and contribution have been unnecessarily narrow. Coming from Richard Bennett, this was essentially a revolutionary statement. The endowment wasn't just for show, he added, addressing my unspoken skepticism. I meant that gesture sincerely. Your work deserves recognition, and more importantly, support for others following similar paths. Thank you, I said simply. That means a great deal to me. I've also been thinking about Evelyn, he continued, surprising me further. About her music. Did you know when we met, she was preparing for her Juilliard audition? She mentioned something about conservatory scholarships. Richard nodded, absently breaking a pine needle between his fingers. She was extraordinarily talented. Her professors predicted a significant concert career. And then, she met me. Chose marriage and family instead. Did you ask her to give up music? His brow furrowed. Not explicitly, no, but I created conditions where continuing seemed impractical. My academic career was demanding, requiring frequent relocation. Children came quickly. There were faculty responsibilities, social obligations, and your career naturally took precedence, I suggested gently. He accepted this without defensiveness, another indication of genuine reflection. It was a different era, he said, not quite an excuse, but an acknowledgement. But yes, my professional advancement became the family priority, almost without discussion. And somewhere along the way, Evelyn's music became categorized as a hobby rather than a vocation. Like my computer pictures, I noted. Richard winced slightly at the reminder. A fair comparison. It's a pattern I'm only now recognizing. This tendency to devalue creative pursuits that don't align with my particular understanding of achievement. We sat with this acknowledgement, watching a blue heron glide across the cove and land gracefully on a distant dock. Evelyn still plays beautifully, I offered. I heard her practicing this morning. Yes. His voice contained a complex mixture of regret and pride. She's been preparing for weeks, apparently. In private, when I was occupied elsewhere. He paused. 47 years of marriage, and there are still chambers of her heart I haven't properly explored. The vulnerability of this admission from a man who prided himself on certainty and authority was deeply affecting. It's never too late to start listening differently, I suggested. He nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps that's the project of my retirement. Years. Learning to hear the music I've been too busy to appreciate. Our conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of the lunch bell, another Bennett family tradition, calling scattered members back to the main house for the midday meal. We rose together, navigating the stone path back through the pines. As we emerged onto the manicured lawn leading to the house, Richard paused. Jennifer, regardless of what happens after this weekend, how quickly old habits reassert themselves, or new patterns take hold, I want you to know that I see you differently now. Your place in this family is not defined by domestic service or conformity to Bennett traditions. Thank you, Richard, I replied, genuinely moved by his earnestness. That's all I've wanted since joining your family, to be seen for who I actually am, not who you assumed I should be. He offered his arm in an old-fashioned gesture I'd never experienced from him before. Shall we join the others? I believe it's Philip and Margaret's turn to handle lunch service. I accepted his arm with a smile, and we walked together toward the house, our shadows stretching side by side across sun-dappled grass. No longer patriarch and kitchen help, but something approaching equals. Lunch was a casual affair. Sandwiches and salads arranged buffet-style on the terrace, with family members serving themselves and gathering in small groups around the property. I found myself moving easily between conversations, no longer tethered to the kitchen or relegated to discussions of recipes and domestic matters. Aunt Eloise sought my opinion on commissioning a digital family history installation for their 50th wedding anniversary. Cousin Michael asked about collaborating on interactive elements for his law firm's new website. Even Uncle Philip, historically, the most traditional of the Bennett brothers, engaged me in thoughtful discussion about intellectual property rights for digital artwork. These interactions, while seemingly ordinary, represented profound shifts in how the family perceived me, no longer as merely Daniel's wife with a quaint artistic hobby, but as a professional with expertise worth consulting. More significantly, I received these overtures without surprise or excessive gratitude, accepting them as the natural acknowledgement they should have been all along. As afternoon approached, family members gathered in the great room where the baby grand piano gleamed in a shaft of sunlight. Chairs had been arranged in a semicircle, creating an informal concert space. Evelyn was nowhere to be seen, presumably preparing privately for her performance. Daniel found me as I entered, slipping his arm around my waist. "Mom's nervous," he murmured. "I just saw her in the library looking like she might be sick. Should I check on her?" He nodded gratefully. "Would you? She might appreciate some moral support from someone who understands performance anxiety." I found Evelyn in the small library adjacent to the great room, standing by the window with hands clasped tightly before her. She'd changed into a simple blue dress I'd never seen before, her silver hair arranged more elegantly than usual. "Evelyn," I said softly, "you look beautiful." She turned with a startled smile. "Jennifer, thank you for coming to find me. I'm being ridiculous, aren't I? Stage fright at 70. "Not ridiculous at all," I assured her, crossing to stand beside her. "Every performance matters, especially when it represents something as significant as reclaiming your voice." She exhaled, shakily. "That's exactly it. This isn't just about playing the piano. It's about being seen as more than Richard's wife or the children's mother. It's about remembering the woman I was before all those roles consumed my identity." "I understand completely." She took my hands in hers, her fingers cool and slightly trembling. "Your courage these past few days gave me this push. Watching you stand in your truth despite years of Richard's dismissal, it awakened something I thought was long buried. You never lost your music," I reminded her gently. "You just set it aside temporarily." "For nearly 5 decades, she said with a rueful smile. "Some temporary measure. The important thing is that you're reclaiming it now, and whatever happens out there today, whether your fingers cooperate perfectly or not, you've already won by choosing to play at all." She squeezed my hands gratefully. "When Daniel brought you home, Richard saw only your lack of credentials. I saw something else entirely. A young woman with quiet strength that reminded me of myself before I learned to make myself smaller for others' comfort." She straightened her shoulders. "I won't make myself smaller anymore. Neither should you." "It's a deal," I promised, impulsively embracing her. When we entered the great room together, every seat was filled. Family members quieted as Evelyn made her way to the piano, carrying herself with newfound dignity. Richard sat in the front row, expression uncharacteristically vulnerable as he watched his wife take her place at the instrument that had once defined her identity. Evelyn settled onto the bench, adjusted her posture, and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes, centering herself in the silence. Then, without introduction or explanation, she began to play. The music that filled the room was nothing like the pleasant background melodies one might expect from a grandmother at a family gathering. This was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. Passionate, technically demanding, emotionally complex. Evelyn's fingers moved with surprising agility across the keyboard, drawing forth thundering bass notes and delicate upper register passages with equal command. I watched Richard's face as his wife played, witnessing a transformation in his expression from polite attention to genuine awe. Perhaps for the first time in decades, he was truly seeing Evelyn, not as an extension of himself or a supporting player in his life's narrative, but as an artist in her own right, possessed of gifts he had allowed himself to forget. The piece built to its famously difficult coda, fingers flying in a cascade of notes that required both technical precision and emotional abandon. Evelyn rose to the challenge magnificently, her body swaying with the music's intensity, her face alight with the joy of artistic expression too long denied. When the final chords reverberated through the room, there was a moment of stunned silence before applause erupted. Not the polite acknowledgement of a family obligation fulfilled, but genuine appreciation for an unexpected display of mastery. Evelyn remained seated at the piano, color high in her cheeks, accepting the ovation with quiet dignity. Richard was the first to rise, crossing to stand beside the piano. Something passed between husband and wife in that moment, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of all that had been set aside and might yet be reclaimed. Without words, he extended his hand to her, helping her rise from the bench to properly receive the family's appreciation. "That was extraordinary, my dear," he said, voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "I had forgotten, or perhaps never truly understood, the extent of your gift." The public acknowledgement, delivered in front of the entire family, carried weight far beyond the simple words. Richard Bennett, arbiter of accomplishment and value in the Bennett hierarchy, was formally recognizing his wife's artistic achievement as worthy of respect, something he had failed to do for nearly 5 decades of marriage. Evelyn accepted his words with a gracious nod, but I noticed she stood straighter beside him, no longer instinctively diminishing her presence in his shadow. Another small but significant shift in the family's tectonic plates. The remainder of the afternoon unfolded with a lightness unusual for Bennett family gatherings. Traditional hierarchies seemed temporarily suspended as family members mingled more freely, conversations crossing generational and status lines that typically remained firmly drawn. I moved among these interactions as an equal participant rather than a domestic facilitator, offering opinions, sharing laughter, building connections previously denied by my assigned role. As evening approached and family members began preparing for departure, I found myself on the terrace with Daniel, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of amber and rose. From inside came the sound of the piano, Evelyn playing again, this time with Caroline beside her on the bench, attempting a simple duet. "I can't remember the last time Mom played twice in one day," Daniel observed. "Usually she puts the lid down as soon as possible, like she's afraid of drawing too much attention." "Things are changing," I replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Slowly, perhaps, but genuinely." "Because of you," he said, kissing the top of my head. "Your PBS reveal cracked the foundation. Everything else is flowing through that initial break." "Not just because of me," I corrected. "The cracks were already there. In your mother's silent piano playing, in Caroline's unexplored creative interests, in your father's rigid value system that couldn't accommodate growth or difference. Sometimes it just takes one person refusing to play by established rules to reveal how arbitrary those rules actually are." As darkness settled over the lake and family members said their goodbyes, Richard approached us with an envelope in hand. "Before you leave," he said, extending it toward me, "the paperwork for the Arts Endowment. Everything's arranged with the foundation. They'll contact you next week to begin establishing guidelines for the grants." I accepted the envelope, noting the steady way he met my gaze, no longer looking through or past me as he once had. "Thank you, Richard. I'll make sure it supports artists who might otherwise be overlooked by traditional funding sources." "I trust your judgment completely," he replied, the words clearly chosen with care. "Your eye for talent and innovation is exceptional." From Richard Bennett, this represented the highest possible praise. Acknowledgement not just of my accomplishment but of my discernment, the quality he most valued in himself. "One more thing," he added, producing a small gift bag, a token of appreciation for illuminating some blind spots in my perspective. Surprised by the gesture, I opened the bag to find a beautifully bound journal, its leather cover embossed with an intricate geometric design reminiscent of my digital installations. For your next creative endeavor, Richard explained. Evelyn mentioned you sketch concepts by hand before translating them to digital form. The thoughtfulness of the gift, evidence that he had actually inquired about my creative process rather than dismissing it, touched me deeply. Thank you, I said simply. This will be put to good use. As we prepared to depart, loading our bags into the car under a star-filled sky, Evelyn embraced me with uncharacteristic emotion. This isn't goodbye, she said firmly. It's the beginning of something new. I've already spoken to Richard about visiting your studio next month, and perhaps some piano lessons for you if you're interested. I'd love that, I replied sincerely. Richard's farewell was more reserved, but equally significant. A handshake that evolved into a brief, awkward embrace, communicating more than he could likely express in words about his changed perception. As Daniel drove us away from Cedar Lake, headlights illuminating the familiar winding road through maple forests, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not triumph or vindication, but something quieter and more sustaining. The satisfaction of having finally been seen and valued. Authentically. You're smiling, Daniel observed, reaching for my hand across the console. Just thinking about how different this departure feels from previous reunions, I explained. Usually I leave exhausted from kitchen duty and deflated from being invisible. Tonight you're leaving as Jennifer Taylor, award-winning digital artist and newly appointed foundation director, he completed. With my father's actual respect and my mother's genuine friendship. And your sister's emerging collegiality, I added. She texted me about collaboration possibilities already. We drove in comfortable silence for several miles, the car's interior illuminated only by dashboard lights and the occasional passing headlights. The Bennett family compound receded behind us, but unlike previous departures, I didn't feel I was escaping a trial or obligation. Instead, I was carrying forward new possibilities, both personal and professional. What happens next? Daniel asked eventually. After the PBS segment airs nationally, after the museum acquisition, after Dad's endowment launches? I considered his question, watching moonlight filter through roadside trees. I keep creating on my own terms. We build our life according to our values, not your family's expectations. And maybe, I squeezed his hand, maybe we start thinking about that. Family of our own, we discussed. His smile was visible even in the dim light. I like all of those plans. As the miles accumulated between us and Cedar Lake, I reflected on the extraordinary transformation of the past 3 days. I had arrived as the designated kitchen help, expected to serve silently while more accomplished family members took center stage. I was leaving as a nationally recognized artist, whose work would soon hang in major museums, the director of a new arts endowment, and most importantly, a woman who had claimed her rightful place in both her marriage and her extended family. Richard's casual dismissal, "You're just not capable of real achievement," had been thoroughly disproven, not through confrontation or argument, but through excellence recognized beyond his narrow parameters. The satisfaction of that reversal wasn't in humiliating him, but in expanding his understanding, and perhaps helping him recognize other blind spots in his evaluation of worth and contribution. Most meaningful was the change in Evelyn, the awakening of long-dormant confidence, the reclamation of artistic identity set aside for decades. Her journey mirrored my own in many ways, though separated by generations and circumstances. We had both allowed ourselves to be diminished by others' expectations. The difference was that I had found my voice and reclaimed my power before surrendering decades to invisibility. As our headlights illuminated the highway stretching before us, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected gift Richard's condescension had ultimately provided. The motivation to prove my worth not just to him, but more importantly, to myself. In pushing against the limitations others had tried to impose, I had discovered strengths I might otherwise have left unexplored. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage of all. It allows you to quietly build your capabilities while others remain complacently dismissive until the moment arrives to reveal your true capacity, leaving them speechless with the recognition of how thoroughly they misjudged what you were capable of achieving all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.